Hello! On this episode of Grief is Real, Big, Better Shared, we will be talking with Robyn about grief that follows the death of a spouse.
And even having the best people around you, grief is still the loneliest thing you will ever do. I mean, even having the best people around you, no one truly gets what you're feeling and what you're dealing with and the day-to-day reality of it. All the emotions that come with it, of being really, really sad one day or even one moment and being so angry the next, and angry with the situation and with the illness and also with the person. There have been so many moments that I've been so mad at Bill for dying, which is completely irrational. But moments that I really needed him and he wasn't there.
This was a great conversation with Robyn, and I can't wait for you to hear the rest of it, and we will get right back to it. But first, a word from our sponsor.
I'm Kevin Lee, President and CEO of Mid-America Transplant, and we are honored to sponsor this episode of Grief is Real, Big, Better Shared. At Mid-America Transplant, we have the privilege of working with families across southern Missouri and northeast Arkansas who make the heroic decision to donate their loved ones' organs or tissues. While donation often brings families comfort, they are still heartbroken by their loss. We are driven by compassion for these families and continue to walk with them through their grief journey. Mid-America Transplant provides several programs to help families memorialize their loved one, but we believe that some of the best support can be provided by a grief center. We are proud to work with the Center for Good Grief and appreciate everything they are doing in the region to bring healing to people who are coping with loss. Mid-America Transplant is inspired by life and by the donor families who give transplant patients a second chance at life. For more information about being a donor, visit sayyesgivelife.org.
There's a quote out there that says, "Every death needs 1,000 tellings." We don't know who said that quote, but we know that that quote exists. And we say that a lot at the Baptist Centers for Good Grief. And we know that to be true. We know that when we're grieving, we have to talk about the grief and we have to talk about the death and we have to process. But we also believe every life needs and deserves 1,000,000 tellings. And we know that as the mourners who are doing the grief work, that we want to tell those stories. We want to remember those that we love who have died. We want to remember that love. We'd like the pain to lessen, but we want to remember the love. We know that's why it's important to share stories and to memorialize, because we want to honor lives. That's in our development as people. It's wired into us. We think so much about development as children and adolescents, but we forget one of the final stages of development is processing, did my life matter? Did I make a difference? And again, as the mourners, sometimes that's our work to do, is to help celebrate those lives and celebrate the way those lives made many differences. And we're doing that today. And I'm really excited to have Robyn joining me today because we're going to celebrate a life. We're going to talk about life, Robyn's life, her family's life, and we're going to remember. So Robyn, thank you for your willingness to be here today to share with me.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in not telling other people's stories. So where do you want to start today in terms of just letting us know who Robyn is?
Oh, wow. I am a mother of a now 8-year-old who is precious and lovely and amazing. I am a friend and an aunt and a daughter and a niece and all of the things. I am a giver, and I am
Your identity has changed a lot.
it has.
Yeah. Yeah.
It has.
So maybe tell us about your journey to the Centers for Good Grief.
My journey to the Centers for Good Grief was one that was a total God thing. I will always believe that. My husband, Bill, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in June of 2022. And one of the first big hurdles after trying to process his diagnosis was, how do we talk to our daughter about this? How do we tell Emma that Daddy is sick and what this means? And so I was talking to a coworker, trying to process all of this, and she said, I am going to call my friend at the Baptist Centers for Good Grief. They will at least be able to point us in the right direction. And I said, okay, great. And so later the same day, I got a phone call back from Lauren, and I talked to her about what was going on, and she immediately started providing resources and language and really came alongside us at that point, at the very beginning of our journey, to help us help Emma process and understand what was going on, which was so incredibly helpful. She called and checked in, and she sent emails, and I would email every time we got a new piece of medical information, like, can you help me translate this into 8-year-old language? Because we didn't want to scare her, but we also wanted to be very real with her and transparent. And so Lauren was great with all of that. She was amazing. And so she gave us books to read about anticipatory grief, which was so helpful. Things I never would have thought of. I was so grateful. And so after Bill died, she was one of the first phone calls I made and said, now what?
Right.
And she said, I would love to see Emma.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, I would love for you to see her. And so Emma started seeing her. And then I asked one day, I was like, so do you have recommendations for a grief counselor for an adult? She was like, oh, we do that too.
Yes.
Like, oh, that's fantastic. I had only ever known Baptist Centers for Good Grief through Camp Good Grief.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I knew that y'all had a beautiful focus on children and helping children through grief. And I wasn't quite as familiar with the counseling you also provided for adults. And so Emma and I have both been at the center for over a year now, and it has just been a tremendous gift and a tremendous help to us on our journey, and we are so grateful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And you bring up such an important topic about grief, that grief doesn't always begin with a death. Oh, no. It begins with maybe a CAT scan today, or a PET scan, or a diagnosis, and then it continues. Like you said, we'd get a new piece of medical information. And so you had to process it, Bill had to process it, and then how do we translate this to, was Emma 6 at the time?
She was.
Yeah, 6-year-old language, yeah. And then all the other things that you have to do, work and get Emma to school and go to the grocery store, all the quote-unquote normal things while you're grieving.
Right.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we forget to label that as grief, the grief that you experience before the actual death. Yeah. Is that something Were you all able to, you and Bill, do that together? Was there an element of some grieving together?
There was definitely some grieving that happened at the initial diagnosis, but Bill was such a fighter that he spent most of the 6 months between diagnosis and death in denial that he was going to die. He was a fighter, and he believed that he had more time than he actually ended up having. So we didn't get to do a lot of that grief work together. At the very end, when we found out he had like 7 to 10 days to live, we were able to do some of that, but it was a very brief time.
Sounds like you respected his personality and where he was and how he approached things. So taking the cancer out of the picture, who is Bill?
Bill was kind and funny and smart and inquisitive. He loved movies and music and podcasts, and whatever he loved, he was so inquisitive about. So you could name a movie, the most random movie you can think of, and he would tell you who directed it, what year it came out, who starred in it, and probably a Rotten Tomato score. I don't know. He was just really into movies. He loved movies. He was inquisitive, which led to his research on everything. If his boss at his work asked him for a report that showed one set of data, he would produce that report with that one set of data and also 5 other sets of data that you didn't even know you wanted. And it was also, to the point that when you came home from work and you just wanted to vent about something, there were 25 follow-up questions because he needed to know all the details of what had happened and what exactly the situation was. And you're like, no, I'm just venting. This is not
right.
I don't want to answer 25 questions. But that's who he was. He was so inquisitive. Of course, he was a great dad. He loved Emma with all his heart. He was kind. He would give you the shirt off his back. He loved to run. He loved his work. He was very passionate about Excel spreadsheets, which is not something a lot of people get passionate about.
No.
But he was great with Excel spreadsheets, and he loved figuring out how to get information out of them, which is a very unique gift.
You said he loved podcasts. What would he think seeing you here today?
Oh, I think he would love it. Yeah. He listened to podcasts all the time, and he would listen to them on 2 times speed so that he could, listen to as many as possible in the course of his day, or his run, or whatever he was doing. But I think he would be excited about this.
And kind of twofold, you doing a podcast, but also how well you've mourned, the time you've taken, the care you've given yourself and Emma.
Yes.
Sounds like something he would have researched.
He would have. He would have read all the blog posts and all of the books and would have known the best way to do this and would have figured out quickly that there is no best way to do this.
Right.
So I like to think that he would be proud of us.
Sure. I think when people are listening, and a lot of the feedback I get is people really love hearing podcasts because they're sitting here, like you just said, trying to figure it out, and there's no one way. So you can't just like go get that book off the shelf and, How to Grieve 101. We wish it were that easy. Can you remember back to those first days and weeks and, maybe talk about what that was like versus where you are now, at about 1.5 years? And then...
Yes. So I was that person right after Bill's death who was going to find the book or the checklist or whatever it was that was going to tell me how to do this, because I had no clue.
Yeah.
I had no clue. I had lost people in my life before. I was with my grandfather when he died. I was with my aunt when she died. I've lost a sister. But nothing prepares you for losing someone that you spend every day with. It's different. And I didn't know how to do that. So I read the books and I read the blog posts and I listened to the podcasts and did all the research, because I was going to do this and I was going to do this well, and I was going to go through the checklist, only there was no checklist. It did not take me long to figure out. It took me longer to accept, but it didn't take me longer to figure out that grief is not linear,
right,
and that there is no right way to grieve, and that however you're doing it is the right way, that it's just something you intrinsically know how to do. It's personal. How I grieve is not how Emma grieves, is not how my best friend would grieve. So it was hard. Those first 6 weeks especially, I remember just feeling so lost. And also, there's the other aspect of being responsible or feeling responsible for somebody else's grief.
Absolutely.
And so trying to manage Emma's grief.
Yeah.
And then also being thrown into being a single mom. And so all of a sudden being responsible for everything. All of the finances and the house, and getting Emma everywhere she needs to go, and the homework and the animals. And I mean, it was very overwhelming. Very overwhelming.
Would you say your own grief, because of all those things, kind of went to the back burner?
It absolutely did.
Yeah.
Which may have been, I mean, sometimes grief loves a good distraction, right?
Absolutely.
So
yes. It'll hang out and wait.
It did.
Yeah.
It did. I was thinking maybe it would just eventually go away if I ignored it.
That's what we all think, yeah. But it'll wait.
But that did not happen. It totally waited on me.
Yeah.
And so as Emma and I began to settle into a routine and figure some things out, then I had to deal with the grief that was still very large and looming. And it was interesting to figure out how to grieve and what that looked like in terms of Emma and grieving with her and grieving alone and managing all of that was quite the challenge.
Well, I like how you said, I knew it. It took me longer to accept it, especially about grief not being linear. And I think that's the main thing. I think most of us know it, but we resist it. We fight against it because it feels overwhelming. It feels so intense. It's emotions that are so intense. And it can just feel like, you can't survive it.
Yes.
Yeah. And so sometimes it going, like you said, grief loves a good distraction. Some distraction sometimes just keeps us going, putting one foot in front of the other, survival, until we can come back to it.
Right.
Yeah. And then again, like you said, there's Emma's grief, there's your grief with Emma as a family, and then there's your grief.
Right.
And figuring that out. And I can tell that you probably like a good to-do list.
I love a good to-do list.
Yeah, I do too. And you're right. There's no like one to-do list, but we have to figure out our grief to-do list. And then we have to accept the frustrating part that it changes.
Yes.
Daily, but sometimes even within a day.
Yes.
Like what is going to help me? Maybe what helped you function the day before is no longer working today. And then it's the exhausting task of, well, what is it today? Yeah.
Yes. And all the emotions that come with it of being really, really sad one day or even one moment and being so angry the next. And angry with the situation and with the illness and also with the person. There have been so many moments that I've been so mad at Bill for dying, which is completely irrational. But moments that I really needed him and he wasn't there.
Yes.
And
oh yeah, people have talked about just furious that he's gone because I don't know the password now. Or I don't know who I'm supposed to call when this happens because that was always in his kind of assignment of duties because that's what we do as couples. We divvy up the responsibilities.
Yes.
Yeah. I can, even in my own family, can remember my mom yelling because she didn't know the password for Comcast. And I was just like, well, I don't either, but surely we can reset it. But it was just, that was a tipping point for her that day.
Right.
Of the password.
Right. And Bill was the keeper of all the passwords.
Yeah.
And so I can remember in November when he died in December. And in November, just trying to extract so much information from his brain. Yeah. But he was still at that point where he didn't see an urgency in that. We were not on the same page as far as timeline. And so it was really hard to say, you're not always going to be here. I need this information.
Right.
But it was true.
Yeah. Not wanting to take his hope away, but also knowing what the reality was.
Oh my gosh, he had so much hope. Yeah. And it was contagious was the problem.
Yeah.
So when we got the diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer, my experience, I had known 4 people who had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Okay. And all 4 of them were 6 months diagnosis to death. And so that was my experience. Okay. So when we heard the diagnosis,
you counted out 6 months?
I did. I said, he is going to die before Christmas.
Yeah.
In my head, and I didn't share that with him. The surgeon who gave us the diagnosis was a little more optimistic and said, maybe 18 months, maybe 24 if the chemo really works. And so that's what Bill heard, and that is what he ran with.
Right.
So 6 months was never part of his reality.
Yeah.
He was living much further out. And like I said, that hope and that determination became so contagious that I started to believe that maybe we had longer than we did. But we didn't. It was almost 6 months. Yeah. He died right before Christmas. So
that's just another element of the roller coaster for you of this, here's my experience, here's what I know to be true, but hope is so contagious. Yeah.
It is. And I've always considered myself a hopeful person, but with this, I felt such a need to live in reality because of everything that was on the line. I wanted to be hopeful. I wanted him to have more time, but I needed all the information. And all the information I was getting was telling me that there wasn't as much time as we wanted.
Yeah. So in those first few months, what did you lean into? What seemed to help you the most? And it probably changed, like we just said, daily or weekly.
It did. It changed. But my constant throughout all of Bill's illness were my friends, my village.
Good.
They were amazing. The text messages, the offers for help, the things that I didn't know how to ask for, the things I didn't know I needed of, I'm going to come get Emma and take her on an adventure Saturday for 4 hours, of, I'm dropping off dinner tonight. Oh, great. One of them eventually set up a meal train, which was very helpful. And I mean, just all the ways that my friends showed up for us is what really got me through those months.
You bring up a important point, because a lot of times we don't know what we need. And then even if we maybe have an inkling of something that we might want, we're kind of conditioned in our world to not ask, or I should be able to do this, or I was able to do it, and so why can't I do it now? And then that brings in grief. Naturally just attacks our self-esteem. It doesn't matter who you are, your self-esteem just goes falling, crashing apart with grief. And so then it's like this, well, I can't even take care of my child. What's wrong with, so all these thoughts that come with that. And so to have people who can just show up and say, this is what I'm coming to do, I think that's really important, because hopefully a lot of people who are listening to this too want to know how to support someone. So you would say to those people, show up, or make the call and don't ask, what do you need?
Right.
But instead, I'm going to do this.
Right.
Is that okay?
Make a concrete offer of help, or just do it. Because even if you say, do you need, natural responses are like, oh, that's okay.
Yeah. I don't want to be a burden.
Yes. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a problem. Don't worry about it. So just do it. And to keep showing up long after the funeral is over. Long after. Settling into a new reality without your person, and being a single mom, and still trying to process that grief is a lot. It is a lot. And so just because 6 months have passed, or 9 months, or a year, or 2 years, I think to still show up, to still ask about the person,
Yes.
to say their name,
Yes.
to let people know that you remember that they existed, that they lived, that they were a part of your life for so long, or not as long as you would have liked. But just keep showing up in all the ways that you can. I mean, everybody has different gifts and different ways and different things they can do, whether it's as simple as a text message, or a meal, or taking a child for a couple hours, or there's just so many ways that are so helpful and mean so much to the griever that you may not think mean a lot at all, but they can mean the world.
Huge. Yeah. Especially when you're sort of kind of on guard a lot, and you're trying to just take care of the needs, and you're trying to keep your grief at that back burner, to have 4 hours where maybe you can just sit, or you can try to grieve for a moment, or just breathe, without someone watching you. Are we okay? Are you okay? Those kinds of things. Or entertain me when you don't have the energy to do the entertaining.
Right. Exactly. Yes. One of the big things I've learned through all of this is how much differently children grieve than adults. And to watch Emma process this, I mean, it's not as front and center for her. And it comes out in ways that don't look like the ways that my grief comes out. It's totally different. And so
it makes it so much harder.
Yeah, more interesting to try to figure out how to navigate all of it. with both of our griefs looking different, but living side by side and intermingled and all the things.
What are some things that you two have done together to mourn, to actively remember, to share openly?
We talk about Bill all the time. On his birthday, we took balloons and got donuts and ate his favorite foods and told stories. Mm-hmm. And then on his death anniversary, we did the same. We laughed and cried and talked about all of his favorite things and our favorite stories of him. Good. Emma just had another birthday. And it was so hard because I went in to wake her up and I said, "Happy birthday." And the first words out of her mouth were, "Now, is this my second birthday without my daddy?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, it is." She's like, "And how many birthdays have you had without him?" And I said, 2. So we talked about that for a minute.
Yeah.
And she had a couple of other grief moments surrounding her birthday, which were hard. Mm-hmm. But we were able to talk about other birthdays she had had with him and ways that Daddy liked to celebrate. And
that's such an example there too about, you're talking about the way that children grieve differently from us, because you're going in and you're just like, it's her birthday and I'm going to wake her up and I'm trying to have all this energy because I'm doing this as a single parent now, but happy birthday. And then bam, she hits you with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's not like you hadn't thought about it. You're very aware this is a second birthday without her dad, but you're just like, oh, okay, here we go. But I also hear so much goodness, Robyn, in that you went with it. You went with that wave with her. You rode that. You answered her. You empathized. You sat there with it. And then what children do, she probably bounced on. And then you're kind of like, now what do I'm reeling now over here.
Yes, that's the other thing. That kids are so resilient.
Yes.
And they have those moments of grief and they're able to move on from them so much quicker.
Yes.
Than I am as an adult.
Yes.
Like when I have a grief moment, it's going to last a minute.
Yeah.
And she has her grief moment. And
I had a mom say it was like a wildfire because like they run through and I'm over here like just, dissolved.
Right.
And then like, okay, it's going to take me a while to rebuild myself. And they're already just moved on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. They have moved on to the next thing.
Right. It also says so much that though about Emma and her grief work that, she could just openly say that. Like she knew that her mommy is someone safe to say this to and that she's processing what is my life, what is our family now without Daddy physically here.
Yes. Yeah. And I give so much credit to Lauren and the Baptist Centers for Good Grief to give her the tools necessary to process her grief and the language and the actual toolbox of things that she can do physically when she gets upset, when she has a moment, when the permissions that she has to know that it's okay to have those moments and to cry and to be mad and all of the things. I think just the education around grief, especially at that age, has been so important and so necessary and so very helpful.
And I completely hear that, and I love that, and Lauren is wonderful, and I so believe in the work we do. But one thing that we believe so much in is when the parent puts their grief front and center and gives their grief the attention and learns ways of mourning and learns all these things. When we see a parent grieving in a healthy way, we know the child is going to get there. Right. Because, as a parent, you're modeling everything all the time. And that's the other pressure, right, about with grief is like, oh, I've got to now model good grief behavior.
Right.
But when we see parents take the time for themselves and their grief, and it's not always pretty, but being honest and open about that, we know that child is going to grieve and mourn well, too.
Yes.
Have there been those moments where you're like, oh, that probably could have been better, or oh, I was just so bluntly honest with my grief here?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yes. And I will go in and I will talk to my counselor and say, or I will talk to Lauren and say, I think I screwed this up. This is what happened.
Right. Yeah.
And she's like, you didn't screw it up.
Yeah.
That's just a real moment of grief. And we're able to talk through it. And I get helpful tips of maybe next time, here's a different way to handle it, or a different way to say it, so it's a constant learning curve, and it's frustrating, and it's good though. It is good to learn how to better connect with her through this, and to have those tools and that those resources to figure this out together. This is not something we ever imagined we would have to do. Not something you can plan for. So to be able to learn together how to do this is a gift.
One thing that we get asked a lot from women is, well, what do I do next? What do I do with the stuff? Is there a timeline, or how do I do this? Or how do I even begin to approach, these next steps, whatever they are? How did you find your way navigating?
I will tell you that I read in so many places by so many people, because I read all the things. So many people say, don't do anything for a year. Don't make any major decisions. Don't do anything for a year. I didn't listen to that. I knew when Bill died, we were in North Mississippi, and my village was all in Memphis. And so I knew that one of my priorities was to get us closer to the village because we were going to need them more than ever. And so we sold the house, which meant going through all of Bill's things. And so I think going through it, and this was at the 4-month mark. So grief was still very raw and very prevalent. But I think it was helpful to go through everything at that point. And, I made a box of the things I wanted to keep for me. I made a box of the things I wanted to keep for Emma. We kept some shirts that we could cuddle up in, and he loved that our church had such a prevalent ministry for those experiencing homelessness. And so I think he would have loved that that's where all of his clothes and shoes went. And so it was hard, but it was so helpful to get to where we are right now and to be closer. I mean, I just went through this flu, strep, COVID, all the things within the past 6 weeks. And we had so many people who were just right there dropping off food and medicine and flowers. And it just helped me to know that we were in the right place. We're where we need to be right now. And so I think, again, I would just say that grief is so highly personal. And that there's some great advice out there. And for a lot of people, waiting a year is probably the right thing to do. But it's not the right advice for everybody. Sometimes that's not what you need to do. And so I think where we are and is where we need to be. And I'm glad we were able to make that move. And I'm glad that it happened on the timeline that it did and got us closer to our people to help us through this.
Yeah, people ask that all the time about the year. And a year means nothing. You don't wake up the day after a year and it's like, oh, okay. But as people, that's how we live. But I think you're right. It's just so personal. And what I always encourage people is take a minute to think. Let's think through this. What is the goal here? What are we looking for? What are my intentions really? And you'll know if you're trying to run or if I need this because I need my village or I need the support. Yeah, absolutely. And we have to, as people, think through those things for what is best for us and our family. And there's a lot of chatter out there that will tell us a million different opinions.
Yes.
And weeding through those and really remembering I have to do what is right for me. Did you get a lot of grief advice?
Not as much as I've heard other people get.
Okay.
Which I was grateful for. I got a lot of grief support
Good.
from friends and coworkers.
Right.
Which was so great and so helpful. But no one really tried to tell me how to do it or that I was doing it right or wrong or anything. I think that was a gift that I didn't have to have that feedback to contend with in the midst of trying to figure it all out.
Yeah. How do you all, because I know with Bill dying right around Christmas, when it came back to a year and really it was then the second Christmas for you all, but probably the first Christmas you may have really felt.
Yes.
How did you all approach that in terms of survival, remembrance, memorialization, joy?
Yes. So Bill died on December 23rd, right before Christmas. And so I, had that date on my radar screen. Well, it will always be permanently emblazoned in my brain.
Yes.
But I started thinking 6 months out, what are we going to do that day?
Yeah.
And with it being so close to Christmas, what can we do that day?
Sure.
And so I started talking to friends and decided that Emma and I did not want to be alone that day. Mm-hmm. And so I sent out an invitation and had this 6-hour open house at our new place. And so that morning, Emma and I got up and we went and got donuts and we went, there's a plaque for Bill in our columbarium at our church. Mm-hmm. He's actually buried up in Ohio in his hometown, but there's a lovely plaque with his name and his birthday and death date on it. And so it's been a great place for Emma and I to go and feel closer to him, to have that touchstone, that place to remember. And so we got up and we went and got donuts. It was a Saturday and we went, it was a little bit chilly that day, but we went and sat outside in the columbarium and had donuts with Dad. And we talked and we told stories and Emma ran around and played and we cried and we laughed and it was a great moment. Mm-hmm. Just the three of us.
Yes.
To have that. And then we went home and put out some food and drink and all of our friends came over. And it was 6 hours and a couple of them stayed the entire 6 hours, which was great and helpful.
Yes.
Emma had friends come over and they played upstairs the whole time. And I had friends downstairs the whole time. And it was good. It was what we needed. We needed to be surrounded and we were. And Emma needed to be able to play, and she did, and she had her friends, and I had my friends, and it was good.
Yeah. You seem to have such a good awareness of yourself and leaning into that. It sounds like that's something you've learned, whether that be from your village or just how am I going to survive this? I mean, I hear a lot of that of I'm leaning into this. And
yes.
Sometimes that can be something we have to relearn or rewire about ourselves.
Yes, I would have prided myself on being fiercely independent before all of this. And that's the thing about illness and death and grief, is that you can't do it alone.
Right.
It's so hard to do it alone. And so knowing who you can lean on, and knowing that there are people out there, and even I like to say I have the world's best friends.
Yeah.
And I totally
Sounds like
believe
you do.
that. And even having the best people around you, grief is still the loneliest thing you will ever do.
Yes.
I mean, even having the best people around you, no one truly gets
Right.
what you're feeling and what you're dealing with, and the day-to-day reality of it, which is a blessing and a curse. Thank God that not everybody
It is.
has to
Right.
know that. And,
Right.
and losing, I think, a spouse
Yeah.
puts you in the club that nobody wants to be in.
Absolutely.
And it's a very small club, especially at my age.
Right.
Right. I mean, I'm not young, but not that old either, I like to think.
Right. We think in our heads this is something that we will deal with when we are 80.
Exactly.
And you're not 80.
I am not 80.
No. No.
Some days have felt like
Right.
it, but I am not 80.
So it feels so foreign. You know, this is not when you made your plan, when you and Bill were dating and
Yeah.
getting married and all the things. And
Yeah.
our brains make plans.
They
And
do. And this was
This
not
was not the plan.
This was not the plan
Yeah.
at all. But having people around you and being able to talk about it, to talk about your grief, to talk about your person. I've done a lot of sharing, not a lot. I've done some sharing on Facebook just because I'm a communicator.
Yeah.
And so writing is one of my forms of therapy. It's
Yes,
one of the things I do to
absolutely.
process. And the feedback I've gotten about that has been so interesting. And it's not just that people are curious in that morbid kind of way,
Right.
like they want to know all the details, but
Right.
I think people want to know where you are, how you're feeling. They don't always want to ask because they're afraid that they're going to make you sad
Right.
or that you're not going to want to talk about it. I don't know. I'm sure there's lots of reasons people don't ask. But everybody has always said, thank you so much for sharing. I think when you haven't been through this, that it is helpful to know what it's like
Yes.
and how it works, at least for one person.
Right.
And there was one point where I said that what I hadn't figured out how to ask for, there were moments where I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to do anything, but I didn't want to be alone. And I just wanted somebody to come sit and like help hold this thing that is so heavy.
Yes.
And I just wanted some help holding it for a moment. But I didn't know how to ask for that. And then, like 50 Facebook comments later, call me.
Yeah.
Happy to come sit with you.
Yes. There's something about presence. And again, that goes back to that. We don't know that that's what we need, or that how do you ask for presence, but there's nothing like someone who can just sit. And I love how you just said that, and I'm going to be saying that because that is so perfect. Just helping me hold the heaviness. You don't have to talk at me. You don't have to solve it because you can't.
You cannot solve it.
Just sit with me and help me hold it.
Yeah. It's so heavy, and
It
just
is.
having somebody that can just sit and that's not something everybody can do.
No, it's
not something everybody should try to do.
Right. Some people are really good at making the dinners and having the play dates, and we need those people too.
Absolutely. But if you're someone who is comfortable with that and can do that for someone, it's such a gift to just sit with that person and not ask questions and not expect anything other than just sitting. It can be so helpful.
Yeah. I know a lady who, after her husband died, she finally was able to ask like one friend, I just want you to come over every once in a while. And I know this is going to sound weird, but I just want to put my head in your lap. And if you could just twirl my hair so that I can just feel like I'm 8 years old and it's my mom, and I don't have all the problems of the world. And her friend was like, okay. And then her friend was like, she finally realized, like, oh, I think I'm like I'm really helping. And she was like, you have no idea how much you're helping me for just 5 minutes. I don't have the weight of the world and all the problems. And to be the single mother, to be the widow. I was going to ask you about that word, widow. Where are you with that word?
Oh my gosh, that's so funny you say that, because the week after Bill died, I was meeting some friends for lunch at Novel. And so I went to their grief section.
Yes.
Because I needed a book.
Right.
I needed to know how to do this.
Right.
And I saw the word widow or something about now that you're a widow or something. And I was like, that's not me. Like, wait, is that me now? Do I have to call myself that?
Yeah.
That seems so, I don't like that word.
92.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't like that word.
Yeah.
But having that reaction in the store before I met friends was helpful, because I think if I hadn't had that thought process the first time I saw it on a piece of paperwork,
Yeah.
it would have sent me
Absolutely.
over the edge.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what sends you over the edge when you're grieving. But that would have been one of those things.
That little box next to that word has done it for a lot of people. Yeah. Well, when I asked you at the very beginning, to introduce yourself, I was listening because I'm always curious how people use that word. Some people are like, well, that's me. Some people are like, that is not me, but I don't know. And you said that's a really hard question. And that's so much of your identity has changed without your permission.
Yes.
It's taken a lot of hard work.
That is another thing that I've had such a hard time with, is that everything I was reading and feeling, it wasn't just reading, it was feeling, was that you're not the same person anymore. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I would get so mad.
Yes.
Like, I didn't ask to be a different person.
Right.
I liked who I was.
Right.
Like, I was good with that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be different.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be a different person.
The protest of grief. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's,
I did not
again,
agree.
nobody can prepare you
Right.
for any of this, because even if somebody tries to tell you about this, until you've experienced it, until you're in the middle of it, only then is it helpful to think back to these conversations. But
yeah. So if somebody is listening and they're new to this, they're new to being a young widow, single parent now, what do you think they need to know? Which really, what do you maybe wish you had known, or what was the best for you to know in the beginning?
I think you need to know that you're doing it right. Unless you're completely ignoring it and shoving it under a rug, which is really hard to do with grief. You're doing it right. That there's no way to really mess this up, which I think is what I was afraid of in the beginning. What if I don't do this right?
Yeah.
Where's my checklist so I can make sure that I hit all of the checkpoints and I can say I did this right? And to ask for help. Not even help, because that has such a weird connotation to it, but to ask for things you need. People want to be helpful. People don't always know how to be helpful.
Right.
So asking is so hard, but worth it. And to find time for yourself, especially if you're trying to walk with other people through their grief after this loss, whether that's a child or a sibling or whatever, to find time, to make time to go away for a weekend or longer if you can. Just finding moments or hopefully extended periods of time where you can really focus on your own grief and not the multiple responsibilities you now find yourself staring at and dealing with and trying to incorporate into your life, and the responsibilities of other people, just going somewhere where you can be taken care of for a few days and really focus on your feelings and your grief is also such a gift. Mm-hmm. So I highly encourage that.
I'm a big believer that if you don't deal with your grief, it will deal with you. And so that's what I heard you saying. Like, as long as you're not shoving it all the way down and ignoring it, or maybe doing some things that are maybe not helpful to make it stay shoved down, you really can't do it wrong as long as you are trying and attempting and showing up to it. Yes. Sometimes we'll say, like, you have to befriend your grief. And I had somebody recently just get so mad at that. And I'm like, I didn't say we wanted to be friends with it, but it's going to sit there until you come and acknowledge it, and it'll grow and it'll get bigger and it'll impact your life. It's the friend we don't want. It's the club nobody wants to be in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But I have found that, so there was a little girl at Emma's school who was her same age who lost her dad in December. And so the principal reached out and said, can I get Emma and her together?
Sure.
And my first response as a mom was, I don't want Emma to have to feel responsible for helping somebody else through this. But I talked to Emma and I said, there's another little girl who lost her daddy. She was like, oh, I can help her. Oh. I can be her friend and I can help her through this because I know what that feels like.
Yes.
And it was such a proud moment of knowing that this terrible thing has happened that nobody asked for. But for her and I both, it's how can our experience help other people when they inevitably get to this point? How can we share what we've learned and be helpful for other people?
Mm-hmm. We like to look at that as like borrowed hope, because hope can feel so many light years away and there is no hope. I had somebody recently say, don't even talk to me about hope. There is no hope. And we believe in that. We know sometimes people have to just borrow it from us, that there is even this belief. But we see that with the kids who've gone through Camp Good Grief, paying it forward and helping other children. And just like you on the podcast, Emma helping a friend at school like that is a way that she carries her grief, and goodness from her grief can come and shine through. Goodness of her dad shines through, because if she's going to be talking with a friend, she's going to be talking about her dad too. Yes. But yeah, you're right. We don't want to, the thing about grieving children is they grow up so fast.
Yes. And
we won't want to make them continue to have to grow up. But it does give a place for that grief, to go, and why we call it good grief. Sometimes I've had kids say, why do you call this good grief? That's so dumb. There is nothing good about it. I was like, well, we'll see. We'll see about that, And I think if we mourn well and we take time, like you said, to take care of ourselves and find the ways, then we are that beacon of that borrowed hope for someone else. And it doesn't make it better. It doesn't make it go away. It doesn't make Bill come back.
No.
But it gives us, maybe as people, a little place of an answer for that giant question we all want to know. Why?
Right.
Or how?
Yes.
Yeah. What else do you want to share that you feel like, either about Bill or grief or to someone who's grieving? Is there anything else?
Bill was amazing. It is still hard to talk about him in the past tense.
Yes.
He was a good person. And he was stubborn. And he didn't want to die. And it was one of those things that the hospice people, those last few days, kept coming by and saying, okay, he only has a couple of hours left. Mm-hmm. I was like, okay, just call us. okay. And then they would come back the next day. He only has a couple of hours left. And finally, like day 4, they were like, he's stubborn. Like, he's waiting on something. He's not willing to give it up.
Yeah.
And we had talked and we had given him all the permissions that we thought he needed. And he was stubborn to the end.
It's not the reality he wanted either.
No, he was not willing to give it up that easy.
Yeah.
So, but he was good and kind, and we miss him so much. But grief, teaches you those things that and it doesn't necessarily teach you. It reminds you of how precious life is, and to make the memories, and to have the hard conversations, and to take advantage of all the moments you do have. And I've always felt like that puts too much pressure on life, and it can. Yeah. But until you've walked down this path, it's just hard to know how precious life really is. So I guess I would just say to love your people in all the ways and through all the things, and to show up and to be there and to just love them.
Robyn, I see someone in front of me, and I hear someone who I think has always been a lover of life. And definitely sounds like you and Bill had that journey. And then with Emma, not what you asked for, not what you ever saw coming. I see and hear someone who has grieved well and continues to mourn well and live well. And that's something that we want for people so badly, is to live and mourn well. And it's hard. It's a hard choice to make, that I'm going to continue to live well and I'm going to mourn well. And I do hear and see that. And I'm wondering, what's on your plans? What's next? Especially because you're heading into kind of the second year, the second anniversary.
Yes.
And we know that grief doesn't end after the first year or the second year. So, kind of this stage of your grief, because we know it doesn't end or go away. What do you see?
I see Emma and I having the opportunity to be more intentional about our time and our energy and our resources. We've talked about taking more walks, because Bill loved to run, and we're not runners, but finding ways to honor him and to keep him a part of our lives while also moving forward. And with that reality that he's always going to be in our hearts. And Emma's a great reminder of that. She tells me that all the time, that Daddy is in her heart and Daddy is in my heart. And it's so sweet and so true. And so how can we keep loving him in ways that, as we have more energy and are settling into our reality more, and have the emotion and the energy to do things, how can we honor that as we move forward? And so I think it looks like more walks and more adventures, and always stories about Daddy, and doing things that he loved and doing things that we love, that we know he would support.
And you said intentional, and I think that's the link that links living and mourning, is being intentional in terms of the remembrance for the person who has died, but also in what we love and what we like to do, and linking them together. And often I think that's with that word intentional. So I hear a lot of beauty and a lot of power and a lot of love in that.
Yes.
Yeah. And that feels like a really good place to end. Well, I cannot thank you enough for sharing Robyn, sharing yourself with us, sharing Emma, and also sharing Bill, and sharing your precious family. I do believe that every time we share, we are helping someone else. We are, even if it's one thing that somebody gets from this to help them survive another day. So thank you for doing that. And certainly thank you for sharing Bill with us.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been, it's always great to talk about him, to get to tell stories, and to pass his love of life on.
Yeah, I definitely felt that love of life. So thank you.
Sure.
Grief does heal. Let me say that again. Grief does heal. But like we've said, grief demands attention and care. It also needs support and patience. Remember that your grief is a reflection of your love. You are not alone. The world is full of many grievers like you. You can learn more about us at www.baptistgriefcenters.org. You can check out our YouTube channel, Baptist Centers for Good Grief. You can check out our podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also, know that you can reach out and let us know if there's a topic that you're interested in learning more about. You're welcome to email me at angela.kelly@bmhcc.org. That's angela.kelly@bmhcc.org. And remember, grief is real, big, better shared. We'll talk soon.